Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this video, I want to talk about defending your peace versus defending your ego. I have a perfect example of this. So I was out in Sydney last night with some friends. We were having a good time. There's a bunch of guys and girls, and we went for drinks at a bar, sort of like after work drinks kind of vibe. And later on in the night, a group of my friends wanted to go to a restaurant. And so we had enough people that wanted to go that we needed 2 taxis because the restaurant was, 10 minutes away, something like that. So I got in with my friends in the first taxi, no issues. Sydney's a lovely city. It's fantastic. I recommend. So no issues. We go to the restaurant. We're sitting down. But the second taxi took a while to get there. And we were like, what's going on? So when the taxi showed up, there's only 2 guys in that taxi. And they sat down and they told us that there was actually this sort of like confrontation with the taxi driver, which again is a rare thing in Sydney. I'm sure this is 1 in a million. But they had a really negative interaction. So allegedly the taxi driver was an older gentleman. And as soon as the guys got in the car, he was like kind of like rude to them right away. And then by the end of this sort of 10-minute taxi ride, he had begun to like sort of threaten them and say, hey, like, let's have a fight, those kind of things. And one of my buddies was he has a shaved head. And so the taxi driver was like, at one point, allegedly, because I didn't see this myself personally, said something along the lines of like, hey, like, you're bald and ugly, like, grow some hair or something like that, which is a soft spot for people. Like, I totally get that. And so this guy who had received the insult was really offended. And essentially, like, when he got out of the taxi was like, do you want to fight? Like, they had like this sort of really negative interaction. And this older taxi gentleman essentially was like, I'll come out there and fight you, whatever. The other guy in the taxi essentially said, hey, let me just pay and then we'll leave. Like, this isn't worth it. So he just paid the $10 or whatever it was. And then they came into the restaurant. And then, words were exchanged between the taxi driver and this other gentleman. And that's fine. So I'm sitting at the restaurant and we're hearing the story. And it was super interesting because one person, the guy who had the bald head, let's say, perfectly embodied the spirit of defensiveness, the spirit of defending your ego, having to win every battle, And the other guy who had paid the $10 to get out of this situation was the perfect example of someone who's just trying to defend their peace. And so as they told the story, the gentleman who had been insulted by his bald head accused the other guy of not having his back, essentially, in a playful manner. Like, it wasn't too intense, but he was like, hey, you didn't have my back, like, like, we should have fought that guy, like that kind of language. And the gentleman who was defending his peace was, very calm and articulate, and they debated it. So I got to watch as a third party to this kind of it was kind of like the Jedi, like the light side versus the dark side. It was like a debate of philosophical principles, let's say. And the guy who wanted to defend his peace essentially articulated the position that I think I would support, which was that, hey, it's not worth it. Like, this guy's not well, obviously, but if we fight an older gentleman driving a taxi in Sydney, like, most likely we'll end up in jail. Like, the police will get involved. It'll ruin our whole night. Like, maybe you get hurt when you fight. Maybe you lose, like, God forbid, then you're on YouTube or something, like getting beat up by some old guy. That's not good. And you never know who has what. Like, maybe he's got a gun, a knife, maybe he's crazy, maybe he calls his friends. Like, there's like a lot of outcomes that you don't know could happen, and none of them are necessarily good. He's like, or I could have just paid the $10, like, and said goodbye, like, you're crazy, and just move on and clear the slate and move on with my life. Like, why would we want to bring drama into our lives? And I thought that was a reasonable answer. But the other gentleman was like, no, like, it's a respect thing. Like, you got to, like, he's got to show respect to us because, like, we didn't deserve it. We didn't do anything wrong. And, like, he deserves punishment and rah. And so, like, really, like, negative energy in his heart, And it was interesting to me because the guy who had paid the $10, who actually, like, lost money on the interaction, never brought it up again. He was very relaxed. His body language was chill. The rest of the night was fine. But my other friend, who had this sort of defensive ego, let's say, or defensive identity as a baseline, kept bringing up the taxi situation, like, in a funny way, but he just couldn't let it go. So if we were talking about dogs, he'd say the taxi driver was a dog. If we brought up, like, spaceships, he'd say the taxi driver was a spaceship. Like, he couldn't stop himself from bringing it up because it was eating at him that he had suffered a wound of ego, a wound of identity. And so at the end of the night, when we were all, like, going home, he was even like, I wonder if the taxi driver is, like, out there, like, like the taxi driver had won, actually, even though he maybe hadn't won in the greater scheme of life, but, like, he was in his brain rent free, And I thought, oh, this is so interesting, because if I had to pick between 2 ways of living, I would pick the other one. And I think everyone has to sort of this interaction forced me to kind of consider my own relationships with friends, family, etc. And I go, are there any scenarios where I'm holding my ego higher than it should be and having to win an argument with family and friends? And I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty chill. Like, I think I move towards peace versus confrontation in most situations, and I let things roll off my back. But a lot of people don't. And everyone has some, I'm sure, like in their family, a scenario where, like a brother and sister like had an argument 20 years ago and then never spoke for 20 years, like those kind of things. And that's just essentially a recipe for setting up unnecessary suffering, where if you took the position of the defending your peace, you would say, oh, we had a disagreement, I'm not going to worry about that because it doesn't serve me in a healthy manner, in a suffering kind of context, to hold this grudge, because like, who cares, right? Or the other person goes, on the opposite side of the philosophical spectrum, would say, oh no, he offended me and he has to apologize. And until he apologizes, like, nothing is right in the world and everything is dark, like there's no color in the landscape, like life is suffering. Over exaggerating, of course, but you get the idea. So I think this example, it was nice because I wasn't involved. I just got to watch these two philosophies duel out. And I think this is one of the reasons why philosophy is such an important topic. Like, how you perceive information, how you frame things as good or bad is super important, because in one context, and just this perfect example, one gentleman had a nice night, didn't even faze him that this had occurred. It was just an interesting story, like something fun to tell, but nothing serious. And the other person was like, this is life and death for me. And just imagine, right? Like you're 20, you're at the bar, someone insults you by saying something, and your reaction is to pick up a bottle and smash him over the head. Boom, now I'm coming as a police officer to arrest you. Your life is changed. Two different outcomes, right? On the opposite side, you have the mental model to go, what, I'm here to pursue peace. I'm going to defend myself if I need to, but verbal insults to my identity, or in the case of the bar fight, yeah, I'm not going to fight that guy because I don't think it's worth it for my long-term vision of becoming a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And then you don't bottle that guy, you just take the L, hypothetically, you just take that loss in the moment, that brief moment of insecurity, just kind of let that slide, and then you move on with your night and have a great time and everything's good. So there's two different versions that or two different philosophies roughly you can pick in that, or maybe there's a balance in the middle. But I recommend doing what I did, which was reviewing what relationships you're holding right now that are toxic or that create unnecessary suffering in your life, and either remove those if you can. Of course, family are tough to get rid of sometimes, but if you have these relationships that aren't positive for you, maybe look to offload them or change things to make them positive. But if you are holding this anti-peace narrative where you have to win all the time, examine whether that's useful to hold that position. Because I've definitely held negative patterns with people because it's felt comfortable, like relationships that aren't very healthy, family members that I might disagree with, etc., over long periods of time. Although I'm not prone to that, sometimes it's happened in the past, and I go, oh, like I would never talk to that guy again. But like, I'm holding tension where there doesn't need to be. It's unnecessary suffering. And then when I go, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna let the weight off my shoulders. It makes the day brighter. Like the lights are brighter, the grass is greener, the sun is warm on my face. And it just allows me to move through the world in a much nicer way and put my energy towards helping people and moving the ball forward for society, versus going, ooh, I've got all these sort of like negative frameworks that I'm working through, and my identity and my ego, which again aren't necessarily real. Like, where's your identity? Where's your ego? Like, where is it? Can you touch it? Something to examine internally, let's say. But essentially, you've got, like, am I holding on to patterns that don't serve me? And so this example in Sydney was a refresher for me to kind of look at myself and go, oh, okay, like, let's re-examine my relationships and my situation. Are we good? Cool. And wherever I wasn't good, I was able to kind of let the slack off and defend my peace versus defend my ego. So that's it. I thought I'd just throw that out there. I hope that's useful for you, and I'll catch you on the next video.